Imagine waking up on a summer morning in June and finding snow on the ground. Your crops are frozen. Dead birds lie scattered in the fields. The sky looks wrong. You have no way of knowing that 10,000 miles away, a mountain exploded a year ago. No way of knowing that the two events are connected. No way of knowing that millions of people across the planet are experiencing the same nightmare and feeling just as alone. This actually happened. In 1816, people across the Northern Hemisphere lived through a global catastrophe, but they experienced it in isolation, never understanding that they were all victims of the same event. The eruption of Mount Tambora, the most powerful volcanic explosion in recorded history, killed 71,000 people immediately, but over the next 3 years it would kill millions more through famine, disease, and cold. The world ended twice, once in fire, once in ice, and almost no one realized they were connected. This is the story of how fragile civilization really is, and what happens when catastrophe strikes before we understand how the world works. The mountain that disappeared. On April 10, 1815, Mount Tambora, a volcano in Indonesia, exploded. The eruption was heard 1,600 miles away. British officials thought it was a naval battle. The column of ash rose 28 miles into the stratosphere. Pyroclastic flows raced down the mountainside at 100 miles per hour, incinerating everything. 71,000 people died in days. When the eruption ended, the mountain had lost 4,000 feet of elevation. An entire peak had been blown into the atmosphere. But the real catastrophe was just beginning. The year without a summer. The eruption threw 24 cubic miles of rock and millions of tons of sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere. The sulfur formed a veil around the planet, reflecting sunlight back into space. Global temperatures fell by 0.5 to 1 degree Celsius. That doesn't sound like much, but it was catastrophic. In 1816, frost killed crops in New England in June, July, and August. In Europe, already weakened by the Napoleonic Wars, harvests failed. Food prices skyrocketed. Riots erupted. People ate horses and rats. In China, monsoons failed. Rice paddies dried up. In India, disrupted monsoons led to crop failures and a cholera outbreak that spread globally. The first cholera pandemic. Everywhere, the story was the same. The weather had turned wrong, the seasons didn't make sense, and no one knew why. The disconnect. Here's the astonishing part. Almost no one connected Tambora to the climate disaster. The eruption, April 1815. The climate effects, 1816, a full year apart, 10,000 miles apart. There was no internet, no global communication. News traveled by ship, taking months. By the time Europeans heard about Tambora, they'd forgotten about it when their crops failed. People in New England had no idea a volcano had erupted in Indonesia. People in China didn't know Europe was starving. Everyone experienced the same catastrophe, a global climate disaster, but experienced it in isolation. They blamed local causes, God's wrath, witchcraft, planetary alignment. The world was connected, they just didn't know it yet. What was lost? Direct deaths from the eruption, 71,000. Deaths from global famine and disease, 100,000 to several million. Entire cultures on Sumbawa disappeared, languages, traditions, knowledge lost forever. In Europe, the social instability triggered economic depression, political upheaval, mass migration to North America. And most people who lived through 1816 never knew what caused it. They lived through a global catastrophe and died without understanding what had happened. The birth of understanding. It took decades for scientists to make the connection. Not until the 1880s, after Krakatoa erupted, did scientists understand that volcanic aerosols could cool the planet. Looking back at historical records, frost dates, harvest reports, temperature measurements, they finally realized 1816 wasn't just bad weather. It was a volcanic winter. For the first time, humans understood. Events on one side of the planet can affect everyone everywhere. The world is connected in ways we can't see. The fragility this reveals. Tambora teaches us something terrifying. Civilization is more fragile than we want to believe. One volcanic eruption, one random geological event can plunge the world into crisis. Modern civilization is more advanced. We understand volcanoes, we monitor them, but we're also more vulnerable. In 1816, most people were farmers who grew their own food locally. Today, we depend on global supply chains. Food grown in one country feeds people in another. A disruption anywhere cascades everywhere. If Tambora erupted today, we'd understand what was happening, but would that make us less vulnerable? Or just more aware of how fragile our world really is? The unexpected consequences. Not everything from Tambora was lost. The strange, vivid sunsets inspired artists. J.M.W. Turner's paintings from this period capture skies of impossible color because that's what he actually saw. In Switzerland, Mary Shelley spent the cold summer of 1816 trapped indoors. To pass the time, she wrote Frankenstein, a story about a man who creates a monster he can't control. A fitting metaphor for a species that builds civilizations on the surface of a volatile planet. The horse population collapsed during the famine. This pushed the invention of the first bicycles in Germany in 1817. Crisis forces adaptation, not always in the ways we expect. The modern parallel. We live in a world more connected and more vulnerable than 1815. Climate change alters weather patterns globally. Pandemics spread in weeks, not years. Supply chain disruptions cascade instantly. And like the people of 1816, we often fail to see the connections until it's too late. The lesson of Tambora isn't just about volcanoes. It's about invisible connections, about how events in one place shape reality everywhere else. The final lesson. The world ended twice in 1815, once in fire when Tambora exploded, once in ice when the planet cooled. Most people who lived through 1816 never understood the connection. They experienced catastrophe without comprehending its cause. They adapted, suffered, survived, or didn't, based on forces they couldn't see. We like to think we're different now, that we understand our world, that we're prepared. But Tambora reminds us, the planet doesn't care about our preparations. Nature operates on scales that dwarf human planning, and civilization, for all its technology and confidence, is still just a thin layer of order on the surface of a chaotic world. One eruption, 1 degree of cooling, one failed harvest. That's all it takes for the veneer to crack. The people of 1816 survived not because they understood, but because they adapted to circumstances they couldn't control. They helped each other, they innovated, they endured. That's the real lesson of Tambora. Understanding is valuable, but resilience is essential. Because the next catastrophe, whether volcanic, climatic, or something we haven't imagined, won't wait for us to be ready. It will simply come. And we'll discover once again just how fragile civilization really is, and just how strong humans can be when everything falls apart.